On June 29, 2010, a car company that had never turned an annual profit went public at $17 a share. Almost every serious analyst on Wall Street said the same thing about it. Nice idea, wrong industry, wrong decade. This company is going to run out of cash before it ever builds a car anybody wants. If you had ignored all of them, put $10,000 in on day one, and then done the single hardest thing in all of investing, absolutely nothing, that $10,000 would be worth about $2.7 million today. 275 times your money. But that number is not the interesting part of this story. The interesting part is what you would have had to sit through to keep it. Because between that $17 morning and today, there were at least 4 separate moments where selling felt like the smartest, most obvious, most adult decision you could possibly make. Today, we're going to walk through every single one of them, do the exact math on what each one cost, and then find the one moment where selling would actually have made you richer than holding. Let's set the board properly, because this is where most of these videos quietly cheat. $17 a share in June of 2010. $10,000 buys you 588 shares, and you've got about $1 of change left over. Now, Tesla has split its stock twice since then. In August of 2020, it did a 5-for-1 split, and in August of 2022, it did a 3-for-1 split. 5 times 3 is 15, so every single share you bought at the IPO quietly turned into 15 shares. You didn't do anything. You didn't buy anything. Your 588 shares became 8,823 shares. And that means your real cost basis, in today's share terms, was $1.13. Write that number down, because it's the number that makes this whole story work. Every price we talk about from here on is split adjusted, so you can compare it directly to that $1.13. As of July 31st, 2026, Tesla closed at $311.21 a share. 8,823 shares times $311.21 is roughly $2,746,000. That's the headline. Now here's the part nobody puts in the headline. Meet Jimmy. Jimmy bought at the IPO, and by the spring of 2019, Jimmy is 9 years into this thing, and he is exhausted. Tesla had spent years being one of the most hated, most shorted, most argued about stocks in America. There were credible people on television saying the company was months away from insolvency. In June of 2019, the stock closed at $11.93, split adjusted. Now, that is still more than 10 times what Jimmy paid. His $10,000 is worth about $105,000. Think about how that feels. You turned 10 grand into 6 figures on a car company everyone said was a joke. You would be a legend at every dinner party you attended for the rest of your life. Every rational voice in your head says the same thing. Take the win, Jimmy. Nobody ever went broke taking a 10-bagger. So Jimmy sells $105,000, and he feels like the smartest man alive. Here's what that decision actually cost him. Those same shares, held, are worth $2.7 million today. Selling at a 10-bagger, a genuinely great, genuinely rare outcome that 99% of investors never experience, cost Jimmy $2,641,000. And I want to be very clear about something. Jimmy did not make a stupid decision. He made a completely reasonable decision. That's exactly why this is the most expensive mistake on the list. Now let's do the twist, because there is one, and most videos on this topic conveniently skip it. On November 4th, 2021, Tesla hit what was then an all-time high of $414.50 a share, split adjusted. Hertz had just announced an order for 100,000 vehicles. The whole world had decided electric cars were inevitable, and Tesla was briefly worth more than the next several automakers on Earth combined. On that day, Jimmy's 8,823 shares were worth about $3,657,000. Look carefully at that number and compare it to today's $2.7 million. The person who sold at that November 2021 peak walked away with roughly $911,000 more than the person who is still holding right now, almost 5 years later. And it gets sharper. On December 16th, 2025, Tesla set a record closing price near $489.88. At that close, those same shares were worth about $4,322,000. Selling on that single Tuesday would have beaten holding by nearly $1,576,000. So no, never sell is not a law of physics. There were absolutely days where selling won. The problem, and this is the entire problem, is that nobody knew those were the days. On November 4th of 2021, the mood was not "this is the top." The mood was "this thing is going to $1 trillion and then some." Peaks only look like peaks in the rearview mirror, which is a sentence that costs people money in every generation. Here's what happened next. And this is the beat that separates people who understand investing from people who just like the story. From that November 2021 high of $414, Tesla fell to about $101.81 by January of 2023. That is a drop of roughly 75% in 14 months. In Jimmy's account, that is $3,657,000 turning into about $898,000. He lost $2,759,000 on paper in a little over a year while doing nothing wrong at all. Let me ask you the honest question. If you watched $2.76 million evaporate out of your account over 14 months, while every headline told you the story was over, the company had peaked, the CEO was distracted, and the competition was finally coming, would you have held? Because that is what "never sold" actually means. It doesn't mean you were patient during a calm decade. It means you sat perfectly still while 3/4 of a fortune disappeared, and then kept sitting still while it slowly came back. And this was not a one-time event. Tesla has had multiple drawdowns of 50% or more in its public life, including a fall from that December 2025 record down to about $297 in the past year, another 40% haircut. The 334 times return is real. It was also paid for, in full, in 14-month stretches of feeling like an idiot. Now let's put a fair benchmark next to it, because $2.7 million only means something if you know what the alternative was. If instead of buying Tesla at the 2010 IPO you had put that same $10,000 into a plain S&P 500 index fund and reinvested the dividends, you'd have somewhere in the neighborhood of $100,000 today. 10 times your money over 16 years, which, I want to be extremely clear, is a genuinely excellent outcome. That is the boring, no drama, no drawdown panic, never read a single earnings call result, and it turned 10 grand into 6 figures. But Tesla turned it into $2.7 million. That's a gap of about 27 to 1. Put in annual terms, Tesla compounded at roughly 42% a year for 16 straight years. The index did about 15. And here is the thing about that 42% that everybody misreads. It is not a rate you can plan around, budget for, or expect. It's the outcome of one specific company, in one specific decade, that survived. For every Tesla that went up 275 times, there is a graveyard of electric vehicle startups from the exact same era that went to literal zero and took every dollar with them. Survivorship bias is the most expensive optical illusion in finance, and this video is made of it. So let's talk about what you can actually do with that. Here's the version of this story you can actually use, and the math is completely evergreen. It has nothing to do with what Tesla does tomorrow. Say you have $10,000. Instead of going all in on a moonshot or refusing to ever own one, you take 5%, $500, and put it in your one high conviction bet. The other $9,500 goes into the boring index fund. Now let's run both outcomes over 16 years. Outcome 1. Your moonshot is a Tesla. It goes up 275 times. Your $500 becomes $137,000. Meanwhile, your 9,500, compounding at 10% a year, becomes about 43,600. Total, about $181,000. Compare that to putting the whole 10,000 in the index, which gives you about 46,000. Your 5% side bet more than quadrupled your entire outcome. Now outcome 2, and this is the one that matters. Your moonshot is wrong. It goes to zero. Completely, permanently, bankruptcy and delisting zero. Your $500 is gone. Your 9,500 still becomes 43,600. Against the 46,000 you'd have had going all index, you are behind by about $2,300. That's it. That's the entire downside. You risked 5% of your money to buy a real ticket to a 334 times outcome, and being completely, catastrophically wrong cost you 5% of your final result. That asymmetry is the actual lesson of Tesla, not pick the winner, which nobody can do reliably, but size the bet so that being wrong is survivable and being right is life-changing. And notice that the 5% rule also fixes the 75% drawdown problem, because it's a lot easier to sit still through a crash when the position that's crashing is 5% of your net worth instead of all of it. Let's put it all in one place. $10,000 at Tesla's 2010 IPO bought 588 shares at $17, which 2 stock splits turned into 8,823 shares at a split-adjusted cost of $1.13. Today, that's about $2.7 million, 275 times your money, about 42% a year. Selling at a 10-bagger in 2019, which felt brilliant at the time, cost $2.64 million. Selling at the November 2021 peak would have actually beaten holding by $911,000. And selling at the December 2025 record would have beaten it by nearly $1,576,000. But nobody on earth knew those were the tops on the days they happened. And holding through it all meant watching 75% of the position vanish across 14 months without flinching. The boring index fund, meanwhile, turned that same 10,000 into about 100,000 with none of the heartburn. The usable takeaway isn't find the next Tesla. It's the 5% rule, a small, deliberately sized bet where being wrong costs you almost nothing and being right changes everything. So tell me in the comments, what's the stock you sold way too early, and what would it be worth today if you just left it alone? I read all of them. If the math made this make sense, hit like, subscribe for a new What If Money breakdown, and send this to the friend who still brings up the shares they sold in 2019. I'll see you in the next one.